text me, and Nick could be random, but can I talk to you like tomorrow this evening? And he was acting all weird and really wouldn't tell me anything or anything like that. That he was interested in me, and that he really liked me, and he had liked me for a long time, and that he wanted me to pray about considering a courtship with him.
He hadn't had it yet. Were your thoughts during this time, I'm pretty sure you're praying, whether or not I want to enter this courtship. Were you already in the mindset that he has this terminal illness or this illness that was that a factor in your decision making when it came down to whether or not you were going to enter this courtship?
So, yes, it was. And we had talked about it. Since we were friends, like it took me some time to get an answer to him, like probably a few weeks, because I was really, really praying about it. But we were friends, and I was also kind of transitioning at that point to helping him with more caregiving stuff. Mm-hmm. But like you weren't the only person that had called me. Like there were a couple other people that called me asking me, like, could I please help him? Because there were a lot of things he was going to need to do in order to be ready for the transplant. That his doctors has given him like a checklist of all the stuff he had to do. And he just kind of needed help like organizing and arranging that. So I kind of started helping him with that at the same time that I was considering this this courtship. So we had talked about it, and really at that point he was very, very optimistic that he was going to be able to get the bone marrow transplant and that it was going to work and he was going to be fine. So the issue really was him getting to the transplant and then survive, the recovery and surviving everything that needed to happen for him to recover fully. Because getting the transplant was going to totally wipe out his immune system, and like he was a newborn. And so there was a lot of things that he was going to have to do, and continuous appointments and being very careful and, before he could go back to a normal life. But his expectation at that time was that he was going to be fine.
Sure.
And so he didn't see himself, I don't think, as terminal. He saw himself as he's going to get this transplant, it's going to work, and he won't have leukemia anymore, and it'll be better because we medicine every day. Then he won't have to take the medicine, and he will be in a risk factor, like he would be considered immunocompromised, but like he could live a productive life.
So we like at January at this point around the time he's doing the transplant, and then I think the transplant was a success or wasn't a success? I couldn't remember. Yeah,
so it wasn't. But I remember the day that I gave him an answer about the courtship, I had, it's funny because I have insomnia. I have something called chronic intermittent insomnia. So sometimes I can't sleep and it's chronic. So it occurs all the time, in spurts. And I wasn't able to sleep one night. And that night, the next day, I was supposed to be taking him to get his port put in, for the transplant, the port, so that they'd be able to give him the chemo through it without having to stick him all the time and take his blood, because they have to do it multiple times a day. Mm-hmm. So I had been praying about this thing with him. I knew about the leukemia. That was an extra, thing I had to consider. And I couldn't sleep. And so I got out the bed and I started, sorting my mail or something like that, like just doing something, sorting my mail. And I had this, magazine from Voice of the Martyrs, I think. And the cover said, Onesiphorus refreshes the feet of the saints. And Onesiphorus was one of these people in epistles that Paul referred to, when he would always say, thank this person or bless this person. So he was one of the people, I think it's in 1st or 2nd Timothy. And maybe the week before that, which would have been like Nick's last day at church, the Sunday before that, we had all worn these leukemia ribbons, and we were giving out the orange ribbons, and they brought them on the stage, and Eric, Imprum, one of our pastors, went up there. And one of the things that he shared about Nick was he was like oniferous.
Mm.
Like, and I don't know if I ever told Eric this. I should call him and tell him. He was like, Nick, this is who Nick reminds me of, oniferous. And I was like, Onesimus, like, from Philemon, but no, even someone more remote than that, oniferous. And it talked about how he refreshed the feet of the saints. And like, basically that was Nick's testimony, that he was always wanting to bless people and always wanting to be there for people. And so when I saw this magazine, which was the next week, I remember I threw it across the room. Oh my God. And I felt like, I had been praying about it. I had been praying for confirmation. I had been seeing different things. And when that happened, I was like, okay, I really felt like this is what I'm supposed to do. So on my way to driving him to Baltimore to get his report, that's when I told him yes, that I would enter into the courtship with him. So I think that was probably early January of 2013.
Okay. And what was his response? I mean, he
was excited. Yeah, he was excited. I remember I was exhausted because I hadn't really slept, because of the insomnia or whatever, but he was really excited. And he was like, okay, so, there's a lot of things we need to talk about. Then he had, getting the port is like a surgical procedure. So he had to go in, get that. And then I think I had to take him home after that. But at that point, it had already been decided that I was going to kind of play a major role with his caretaking and like scheduling and using my administrative gift to kind of help get that set up. So I was already kind of like already aware of a lot of the medical stuff, but then after that, that's kind of when I got like more fully integrated into it. Okay. I had been off of work for 2 weeks because I usually am. I have use or lose leave at the end of the year. So I was able to take him to like a lot of appointments and stuff like in that time frame. But there was still, I remember, I think was this the first time I met no, I didn't meet his doctor yet, but he went to check in for something and there was still like a long list of things he had to do. And so I remember being like, okay, I can't go back to work yet because I need to help him. And I called my boss and I was telling him, that I may come in a day late or something like that. And he was like, what are you talking about, Sheila? Look, do not come in here all week. Just come back on the week of whatever. And I remember being like, oh, wow. Okay, thanks.
That's
I had like an extra week to kind of help him get prepared for his transplant. So then he had the transplant. And getting the transplant, it takes a while for them to be able to say whether or not the transplant was successful. I think it's like at least 30 days because it wipes out so many of your numbers. You need to be able to see your numbers coming back up steadily like they're supposed to, but not exceeding where they were supposed to be. And the thing with leukemia is blood cell disease. So what it does is it causes your white blood cell to spike. So it's telling your body that you have infection. And the danger with it is at some point, if your white blood cell count gets too high, then your body is going to start trying to fight itself to, what it thinks is fighting off an infection, but there's nothing there. It's just that your white blood cell count is not in control. So they were looking for him to steadily improve and steadily get back to that normal white blood cell count, but not get over it where he would be considered, in a leukemia phase. And I think maybe toward the end of January, that's when he called me, and I remember it was Super Bowl weekend. I remember, it's crazy. So maybe it was the first week in February, and my uncle had passed away, my father's brother. And so I had to take my father to North Carolina. And on my way there, that's when he called me and told me that they told him that the transplant failed.
Okay. And what was your response like, far as in what emotions did you feel during that time?
Yeah, that was really a crazy time, because I was dealing with my dad's brother, twin brother, having been concerned about my father's, grief and dealing with that. And then this was happening kind of at the same time. It was exactly at the same time. And so, it was difficult. He was really disappointed, obviously. But at that point, his doctors weren't ready to, give up on trying to treat him or trying to see if there was anything else they could do. So I think that hurt him somewhat, in that, they were going to try something else to see if there was something else they could do. He still had to, I think, stay, because he was having to stay very much close to the hospital, because he's had to go every day to get his platelet count, his blood, drawn, the test, and all that different stuff that he had to get, because he couldn't, he had to get blood transfusions because he doesn't have, his cell count was so low, he could not produce his own red blood cell count and all of that. So he had to stay really close to the hospital. And they put him on, I think, just another type of medicine, like pill form, and sent him home. And while they were planning to see like what the treatment plan was going to be going forward, and if they were going to be able to get to another transplant. So that's kind of where it was. It was difficult for him, but I think he was heartened by the fact that, they were going to keep trying. And that thing was, he was not going to stop fighting. Like, he was going to fight this. So in terms of our courtship, it's interesting because our whole courtship, he had leukemia. And a lot of the time he spent in the hospital, because he would have to go in if there were major spikes that came up, and they would have to try to bring them back down with more aggressive medicine that they could give him in the hospital than he could have at home. So there was a lot of in and out of the hospital for him. He had to take the leave of absence from his job, which he really bothered him because he was a teacher and he loved it. So there was a lot of in and out of that. And a lot of the communication we had was, from he was in the hospital. I would be up there just because we were in a relationship, but also because I kind of oversaw the caregiving schedule. And one thing that's funny is I was looking for the notes where I talked about this for the women's ministry, and I was searching for, I don't know, I must have put in his name or something like that. And it's an email that I sent out came up, and you have replied. And I remember I was like, oh, hi, I'm sending you this email because you have, whoever I sent the email to, the mass email to, had said you wanted to help with mixed caregiving, and here's a list of shifts and all of this stuff. And please let me know if you're able to sign up for one of them. And I think you were like, oh, I'll sign up for this one or whatever it was. So I saw that for this interview. So that was
yeah, amen. Yeah, definitely. I think, during that time, I still had that hesitance on. I know you all did 24-hour clocks. You wanted him covered 24 hours, 7 days a week. I was like, this is crazy. It's overload. And what happened is I had the opportunity to go up there and spend some time with him this particular day. And I can see, his energy level was great during that time. But at the same time, I kind of saw seeing it more seriously. I guess I wasn't in the grasp of it completely that he was necessarily as ill as he was, because he just never gave off that indication that things were worse than they are. I just, assumed that he was okay. And then, like I said, he was so well taken care of by the 24-hour clock that I figured he was definitely going to, just continue to improve in his condition. But I think, did he ever come back to the Lanham area, or did he always stay up in the house that they had at the John Hopkins? I know it was like next door or something to the hospital and everything. Did he ever transition back to regular living, or did he stay up there that whole time?
He did. He came back home. Okay. I don't think he was ever able to go back to work, even though he wanted to. He wanted to get to a place where he could go back to work. It's just he worked with kids and he didn't have an immune system. You know what I mean? So he was not able to go back to work. But he did go back to, he went back to Atlanta, and he stayed there until I think when it was, when was this? They started planning for the next transplant. So I guess it was early February when it failed. They had to try to do some other stuff to get his numbers under control. And he had a lot of things like he had to do. The reason why he needed 24-hour care is because he would have to take medicines at certain times. Like these were keeping him alive, these medications.
Right.
He had to take eye drops at certain times. Like there was a lot of different, like scheduled things that he had to do. And I certainly did, it's funny because I'm like a nurturer and I be very maternal. So I had this book that I made everybody write in.
That's my Sheila.
Note take. Like I was like, okay, everybody write in this. I think it might have been my best friend, so Paige's idea, because she was homeschooling her daughter. She was available to help a lot. So we're gonna get this notebook, and everybody write like when did you give him his medicine? Like how was he doing? Like so for when the next person comes, like they would know kind of where. So that was like one of the things we had asked people to do was write in the notebook. And his brothers, he had quite a few brothers. And I remember I had, they were on the schedule and different things like that. So he went back home, but there were times where he had to go back to the hospital, like if he had a spike, and he'd be able to tell sometimes. I think I asked him before, like, how can you tell if your numbers are spiking? And he said he would get like a pain or something like in the back of his neck, like some pain that never went away. And some other symptom he told me, I can't remember, but there was like, he would know like when the numbers must be getting bad. And when that happened, what that meant was that the medicine wasn't working anymore. So then they would have to try another cocktail of medicines. So he would go in the hospital while they tried to get these cocktail of medicines together, while they tried to give him these whatever high doses to get the numbers back down, and all these different things. So I think in April, maybe, again, for another transplant. So he was going to have to go in the hospital. And in order for him to prepare himself for the transplant, they had to basically kill all his cells. So he had to have this high dose chemotherapy. And I think it was a little different. The preparation this time was a little different than what it would have been, what it was the first time. Go in the hospital for like, I remember this 14 days, and there was going to be like a certain amount of days in a row, maybe like 5 or 6 days in a row that he wasn't going to be able to eat. And they were just going to like shoot, basically do this like high level chemotherapy. And so he had to stay for that, where they did this really intensive chemo. And I went to see him on his birthday. I remember that. And I was actually heading out of the country on a cruise that me and some of my friends had purchased before probably even any of this ever happened, to like Israel. It was a Holy Land cruise. And so I went to see him. It left that day, but I went to see him like early in the morning or something, and I spent his birthday with him. And this was, I think, the first day maybe that he was in the hospital. So I wasn't actually here for a lot of that. We were communicating. I remember I was emailing him for the cruise ship. So we were communicating, but I wasn't there I knew everything what was happening, but I wasn't there.
Okay.
And when I got back, he was getting released. And so one of the people from the church, I think, had brought him home. And they were, going to try to plan for the next transplant. I don't remember if there was a date for it yet.
Okay.
But I do remember it must have been. I can't remember when it was. Maybe, let's say if that was May, maybe it was going to be sometime in June.
Okay.
So he didn't really get better after that.
They did the 2 weeks preparation for the chemo?
Yeah.
Okay.
They did. Well, they did. The chemo was a preparation.
Oh, okay. So they prepped him with the chemo. Then they released him to home care,
Yes.
and then after that, he began his I guess the meth infection, but more so his body was responding against it, against even the chemo.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was in June.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that, so I remember when I got back from my cruise, he had come home, and because I saw him, he was, it's funny, he had tried to meet us at the airport, but he didn't tell me, so he was trying to surprise me, and then he was mad because Like he was calling me, but I didn't know my friend's dad went on the cruise and he wanted us to like go out to dinner and all this stuff. So he had been waiting to see me, but I didn't know any of that. So I knew that he was out of the hospital, and I ended up seeing him later that day. He was out of the hospital when I got home from the cruise. So that was probably right before Memorial Day of that year. But he ended up going back again because he could tell his numbers were spiking. He finished the chemo maybe a couple of weeks before that. And so his numbers should not have been responding like that. So in order for them to do the transplant, they have to wipe everything out. Basically, a lot of his numbers have to be near zero, which they were finished doing that part, like once they got him hospitalized, because then he's really susceptible to stuff, but they shouldn't have been spiking. It shouldn't have been spiking that quickly like that. And at that point, I don't know that I had met his doctor yet because I was going to work. So when they would come for their rounds, I was at work, so I'd never met her. Let's see. So he was in the hospital. Maybe what they would do is they would get him under control. He would have to go in because they'd have to try to get it under control. They would release him, send him home with medicine. So he started kind of going through this cycle of they would release him, send him home with medicine. He would be okay for a week or something, and then he'd have to go back. His doctor would be like, okay, come back. So around June, maybe second or third week of June, he had been in the hospital maybe that week. It was a Friday, I remember this. And I used to talk to him. Even though he was in the hospital, we talked on the phone all the time, and I would go up there, obviously. So I talked to him on the phone on my way to work. So sometimes I'll talk to him like on my way in. He wasn't feeling well, but we had a regular conversation. I went to work that day. And I don't remember exactly what date this was, but it was in June. It's about the third week of June. He called me back. Maybe he called my phone around 11, 12, something like that. And I just talked to him like 8 o'clock in the morning on the way in. So, or 9, whatever time it was. And he was like, Sheila, the doctors just came in. They said that I'm not doing well and I need to get my family up here. Wow. And I was like, what? Yeah. I was like, what do you mean? Like, I just talked to him a couple before that. And so they were like, they don't think I'm going to make it. That's what he called me and told me. So I was like, what? So I remember I called my best friend who had spent so much time with him because she was, able to kind of arrange her schedule in such a way. I remember she was really upset. And, and then I was heading out the door. I think when I got there, some of his family members were there. I had to go pick up Topasia from wherever she was. And it was like, it was crazy because I was coming from DC going to Baltimore. So trying to go BW Parkway. Yep. I remember Eric called me on my way out. He was like, let's pray. He was like, and he called me. I remember him being like, okay, Sheila, I just talked to Nick. So I need to call you. What it really is going on? Like, you need to tell me what's really explain it, break it down for me. And I was like, I don't know. I just know he called. He just said, he was okay. I mean, he's not doing well, but I don't know what this whole thing is. He's not going to make it. And so we got up there. It was a Friday. And there ended up his doctors were waiting for everybody to get up there to have this family meeting, so to speak. So all his brothers and his family, his sister were coming from all these different places, his dad. And so when we got up there, I remember they said that basically his numbers the medicine wasn't working. Okay. And his numbers were continuing to go up. And they were going to try. I did some more rounds of medicines, but if they didn't work, that he probably wouldn't make it through the weekend.
Now, through the weekend. So we're in June at this point, and they given them a weekend basically a time frame. Did they actually elaborate what had happened? I mean, we knew that he was under the chemo treatment, but they didn't actually say exactly what accelerated, what we consider acceleration, as to now we're talking not treatment, but now we're talking a weekend thing.
Right.
So yeah, go ahead a little bit about that.
Sure. So his disease, his doctor would always say was really, she would say it was really aggressive and very smart. So cancer has to do with cell multiplication, and this was a blood cancer, so white blood cell multiplication. So what would happen is they would shoot it with this medicine. The medicine will cause the blood count. I mean, it would work. It would cause it to go down. But in his case, how his leukemia case was so aggressive that it would basically learn how to mutate around the medicine for the cells to keep growing. And so that's kind of what would happen. So they would shoot it with everything they had, and his numbers would go down. And, but what's supposed to happen is they're supposed to at least stay down for a certain amount of time and then it steadily kind of go back up, and then hopefully they can manage it with just medicine. But what would happen in Nick's case is his numbers would go down, but they wouldn't stay down. So the reason why he was in and out the hospital was because the numbers would go down. So they considered that, I believe, and instead of having like stages, like, how cancer with tumors have stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, like 4 right. Is like metastasize through your body. They have different phases for leukemia or crisis phases. And if you're in blast crisis phase, that's the most aggressive phase of the disease. And they don't have a lot of hope that if you get to that phase, or at least in his case, that they were going to be able to get it under control, because the disease just starts just ravaging through everything and taking over. And so that's kind of what was happening. So this was June, whatever that Friday in June was. And, it was really scary. So I was like, okay, well, I think we stayed up there. It actually, that day ended up being a blessing. I remember, so we ended up, the word started spreading. People from the church, we were sending texts asking for prayers. And so slowly just people started coming up there.
Right.
Coming up there. Ended up being like 20, 25 people up there. And our pastor came up there. Deshaun and Kanisha came up there, and Sean had his guitar or something.
Yeah.
And we ended up having like this worship service, and like 20 of us there. It was really sweet. It was a blessing, and he was really glad that everyone had come up there. I think that night, I ended up going home at like 2:00 in the morning or something like that. I think his brother stayed up there, and then Topeja was with me, and there's one thing I could say, well, since I've been 12 years old, but through this whole thing, like she was always with me or with him. I remember we talked and we were like, okay, let's go home, let's pack our bags and let's come back up here. Like, cause I basically was like, I'm not going, if he's going to die, I'm not going, I have to stay, I have to be here. And so we were praying that he wouldn't die. We were praying that the numbers would come back down. I remember, I think I sent out a mass email or something from the hospital, and I just got 2 weeks worth of clothes or something like that, sweatpants or whatever. And I remember they would let us spend the night in the hospital.
Right.
Gracious about that. So Paige had a zero gravity chair, and all the people we're just going to be up here. And so that Saturday we went back up there. We stayed there with him. At that point, I could tell how sick he was. He was, vomiting quite a bit. After that, he really had a hard time. After that second round of the really aggressive chemo, he had a hard time eating. Really, after that. And keeping stuff down, he didn't have much of an appetite, and the medicine would cause him to be really nauseous and stuff. So we stayed there that night. That was this Saturday, I think. Okay. Somehow at some point I fell asleep, and Topeja came and she woke me up, and she was like, he can't see. And I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean he can't see? And she was like, he's saying he cannot see. And I was like, Nick, what is going on? What's going on? And he was like, I don't know. I can't see. All of a sudden, it's just everything is dark and blurry and I can't see. And I was like, okay. So I remember
I'm pretty sure this is quite scary for you.
Oh, it was terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm pretty sure now I mean, I know you personally, but that probably kicked in that administrative thing again, and you begin to like, doctor, come in, tell me what's going on, and all. Yeah.
So I remember that night I went to the bathroom and I like broke down, and that's the first time I think I had broken down this whole time, because at that point I was like, okay, he's done. Like this is it. He's dying. Like he can't see. Like, and so we were. So I remember they had the on-call doctor come in. They had the nurse come in and different things like that. And they were like, okay, we don't know like what happened with your vision. We don't know. We don't know if we can be reversed and stuff like that. The next morning, the doctor. So that weekend we were praying that he wouldn't, like they were basically saying they didn't think he was going to make it through the weekend, that was going to, that wouldn't be the case, that he would make it through the weekend, that he would prove them wrong, that whatever the medicine that they were giving him and the response needed to happen, but he would respond. And I remember sending out this long email and asking people to pray and stuff like that. And it was at some point, maybe that Sunday, the doctor came and he was like, okay, leukemia that's what happened to your vision.
So that weekend he made it through weekend. And now we're say at Monday, do we get a new plan of action? Do we just continue to see if are we sitting by his by his bedside, just waiting for this event to happen? Or are we now getting new plans from the doctor?
I think by Monday, maybe Tuesday, whatever they needed to see that they felt like they could keep treating him, they saw. So
okay.
He responded, and they were able to keep treating him. But the transplant was off by that point. It was canceled. They were like, they can't do it because his numbers have to be 0. They weren't 0. Mm-hmm. And so at this point, it was just trying to keep the numbers in check. So it was the whole thing was just like this whole song and dance with like trying to keep the numbers. What was the numbers? And that was always what we would go. We would get there and we'd be like, where's the, let me see all the blood results. Like, what's the numbers? And that would be like the first thing. We would always be like, okay, what's his neutrophil count? What's his white blood cell count? What's this, what that? And because knowing that's how we would be able to know how stable he was or not, by looking at the numbers from his blood tests. So I think I stayed, I remember I didn't go back to work for like 2 weeks because he was in that trepidatious of a condition. So they wanted him to go. We went and got another room at the Hackerman, which was the, like the kind of like convalescent, but like apartment kind of place that was like real close to Johns Hopkins. Because he was still going to he was coming in every week. They were having to check his numbers. They were having to make sure they gave him medicine and gave him blood transfusions and all of that kind of stuff. And so I didn't go back to work for a couple of weeks. And that's when when I did meet his doctor, she would come in all the time and talk about like how aggressive his case was. Like we would ask questions, me. So we would ask a lot of questions and, she would answer all those questions. But his vision never came back.
Okay. All right. So now we are, we're now in probably July. He's been at the house for the what is the name? The Hanson, did you say?
Hackerman.
The Hackerman. Okay. So he's hit the Hackerman. I'm pretty sure there was a point where he proposes to you. Yeah. So, it's like, yes, we are now full blown, we don't know where this is going. Your numbers are up and down through this process. We're in July. Now we're in August. And I'm pretty sure. Is that when the proposal took place in August?
Yeah. Okay. Early August. So, we had gotten through this whole crisis. We had gotten even closer than we were, and we had spent a lot more time together because I was basically living at the hospital or living at the Hackerman or whatever it was. He never got well enough to go home again.
Okay. So
he ended up going to another place, the Hope Lodge, which he could stay at for free because of his condition. And so it was down the street, but he moved over there, and that was another like hotel kind of place. He was still going in and getting the transfusions and the platelet counts and different things like that. And if he had to get hospital, the same thing, if he had to go in for a day or two, they would take him in, they would get his numbers under control. But his doctor at that point started telling us, like being more frank and saying that she was running out of options to treat him. And he never wanted to give up. So he never wanted to fight. He always wanted to fight. He never wanted to give up. And so he was at the Hope Lodge. I remember I went up there on a Saturday, I think. Did I go up there on a Saturday? Yeah, I went up there on a Saturday. You know, it was my shift, you know, of the people, it was my shift. And, you know, we got settled there, spent time there. And sometime during that week, I remember talking to him on the phone. And he was asking me, like, you know, about marriage and different stuff like that. And I was like, Nick, I don't know what you want me to tell you. You're going to have to propose to me if you want to know if I'm going to marry you. Like, you know what I mean? I'm not going to, like, you know, so I think I ended up telling Topasia that, like, something like, oh, he's like starting to talk about, you know, like proposing. And I knew before this that Nick wanted to marry me, because he had told me pretty early on that he wanted to marry me. But he wanted to see if it was God's will for us to be married. Okay. That was his desire. So he had that months and months before that. So I already knew that. Okay. But this is when he started, like, I felt like trying to like probe me to see like if he proposed, would I say yes to him and stuff like that. So I ended up telling Topasia this. And I remember a Saturday morning, I woke up and my roommate was like, oh, I'm making pancakes. And I was like, okay, great. Well, let me know when pancakes are ready. So I think she texted me and said the pancakes are ready. So I was like, okay. So I have my pajamas on. I look crazy. I've literally been up for a few minutes. And I walk down the steps and he's in my living room. And Topasia's there and there's the camera. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? What's going on here? And so that's when I realized that he's trying to propose to me. So I ran away and I ran back up to my room because I looked crazy. I did. I literally ran away. I ran away. And I went back in my room and I was like, oh my God, you cannot be here. Look at me. You know, I can't believe this. What do you mean you're filming this? Like, what is... And so I remember he came to my door and he was like, open the door. And I was like, no, I'm not opening the door. So he was like, Sheila, open the door. So, open the door. And he was on his knee and that's when he proposed.